Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme we'll be looking at the importance and the significance of lobbying Parliament and our MPs on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. This is a historic time as the British Zionist Federation, together with Christian Friends of Israel, are doing a joint lobby of Parliament this year to raise three very important issues. The firstly, to ensure that stronger sanctions are in place to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. The second issue is the growing threat of the delegitimization of Israel and boycotts. And the third issue is what's happening to Christian minorities who face persecution as we see a tidal wave of Islamic fundamentalism grip the region, particularly as the Arab Spring has turned to the Arab winter, with dark consequences not only for Israel and the Jewish state, but also for the ancient Christian minorities in the Middle East. And to join me in today's programme, I'm joined today by Robin Benson, who is the Head of Communication at Christian Friends of Israel, and Paul Charney, who is the co-chairman of the British Zionist Federation. Gentlemen, hello and welcome to the programme.
Hi. Hi, Simon.
I'll start off with you, Paul. You're doing something here which is historic, isn't it? I mean, who could have thought this 10 years ago, that the Jewish community, together with the Christian community, would come standing together, united, for Israel and the Jewish people? Can you talk about how we've got to this development and how important it is for the Jewish community to have that Christian support?
Thank you for having me on the programme today, Simon.
It's a pleasure.
As you say, the growing amalgamation trend of the Jewish and the Christian communities, not just in the Western world, but throughout the Middle East, throughout the remaining areas of difficulties, of war, of hunger, the Jewish and the Christian communities hold very, very much the same morals and values that we hold in the Western world, and we should be working together to try and solve those problems. For us, as Jews, we have always relied on the support of the Christian communities throughout the Western world. That remains the case in the UK, in Europe, and certainly the United States. Without your support, Israel would not be here today.
That's an incredible statement. That's an amazing statement. And Robin, how significant are these days in which we're living in, when your organisation and other Christian organisations can stand alongside Israel and the Jewish people?
Well, sadly, I mean, Simon, thank you for the opportunity to be back on the programme again at this particular time of the year. I mean, sadly, we see a situation, certainly in this country, where the whole issue of Israel and its right to exist as a Jewish state and everything that's connected with that, both politically, morally, religiously, is becoming more and more a divisive issue within the church. We were sitting here roughly about the same time last year, and the situation has not improved one iota, and in fact, in some ways, it's probably deteriorated. And so for Christians who have some sort of understanding of God's purposes for Israel and the Jewish people, to be willing to use the old expression, it's much hackneyed, but to stick their heads above the parapet and actually do something visible in standing together with folk from the Jewish community speaks volumes. It speaks volumes to our politicians, particularly on the day of the lobby, which we'll get to, I know, but it also speaks volumes to others in the church who maybe not necessarily have made a decision one way or other, who are sitting on the fence, maybe are even apathetic as far as the whole issue is concerned. But it does challenge them to look at where they stand, why they think the way they do, and reassess all of the complex issues that surround the things that we're looking at.
And Paul, also, doesn't this really symbolise the strength of the Judean Christian heritage, that it's not just Israel that we're fighting for, it's not only Israel's survival and that of the Jewish people, but the very survival of our Judean Christian heritage, which has been the foundation of Western civilization and certainly its values?
Well, that's an entirely correct statement. The ideologies, the Jewish ideologies and the Christian ideologies have certainly come from an original source, and these ideologies are, in my opinion, lacking in a large part of the rest of the world. And we see the implications of human rights issues throughout the Middle East. And we see the implications of the Western world not standing up for what we believe the right ideologies and the right sense of community is, in order to keep people safe and to keep people free. This is something that both yourselves and ourselves agree upon and agree we need to fight for, and this fight is happening in Israel and in the Middle East today.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would take it. I know I said this before, and I'm not afraid to say it again, but from my perspective, from I think the constituency that I would represent, we would go as far as to say that whatever is good and wholesome and worthwhile about Christianity, we owe to our Jewish heritage, from the roots from which Christianity sprang. And therefore, everything about us as a Western people, the things that we hold dear, whether it's our democracy, our freedoms, spring from that basic foundation, and sadly are being eroded almost as each week passes. And so, the undergirding the things that we're talking about today is this concept, this understanding of where we hail from as a community of faith made up of two sections.
And Robin, it's a wonderful opportunity, isn't it, to go along and to meet your MP and to put issues that are really what we consider very, very important, vital issues,
yes.
Not only for the Jewish community, but also for the Christian community as well. As I very much believe that we're in a time now where the Christian voice has to be raised. It's over 70 years ago since we saw the horrors of the Holocaust, and we saw the total devastation that fell upon the Jewish people at the hands of the Nazis. And yet again, we're hearing those voices again. We're seeing a rise of anti-Semitism across Europe. In the Middle East, we're hearing groups like Hezbollah and Hamas calling for the destruction of the State of Israel, as well as the head of state, the Iranian President Ahmadinejad. Surely now is the time that Christians should raise their voice, get active, and also show that demonstration of love for Israel and the Jewish people by meeting their MPs and by joining this lobby.
Yeah, well, as one or two organisations have pointed out, it was 70 years ago, was it last weekend, that 15 Germans met at Wannsee and determined in their understanding the fate, not just of the Jews in Europe, but if you look at the documentation that still exists today, their determination was to wipe out the total worldwide Jewish population. And we're not overblowing it by stating that Israel faces similar existential threats today. The Jewish people face these threats. Yes, in Israel itself, from the surrounding nations, but actually Jewish populations throughout Western Europe have seen what we hoped we would never see again, a rise of anti-Semitism. It's morphed into anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, but at its heart there is still this root of anti-Semitism that is fueling this hatred of the Jewish people. And therefore the lobby is an opportunity to make a significant stance and say, no, we will not accept this. We will not allow this to happen again, and we want our MPs to be conversant with this issue and at least recognise that their constituents in their local areas who feel differently just from the general status quo and want to challenge that and want to make the MPs think about issues. Actually, you get the impression that with many MPs, and it's understandable in some respects because of the economic situation that this nation is in at the moment, most MPs are probably more concerned with what's going on the local level and representing their constituents. And many of them just don't care. But they should not be allowed not to care. They need to be challenged to think beyond themselves, because what goes on in the Middle East has worldwide repercussions, as we will discuss later in the program. And so this sort of blinkered view that only looks at the local situation needs to be expanded. Yeah.
And Paul, over the last decade, haven't we, certainly since the Second Intifada, We've seen a rapid rise in anti-Semitism
Yes.
and attacks on the Jewish people in
Yes.
Britain, Western Europe and around the world. We've also seen a growing rise of this movement called the delegitimization of Israel
Yes.
and a demonization of the term and the ideology which is known as Zionism, which is a fundamental belief that the Jewish have a right to a Jewish homeland in their ancient covenant land, which is Israel, which has been decimated. You're in the Jewish community. Is there a sense now that things are getting tougher and harder for the Jewish community?
We have seen a steady rise in anti-Semitism. We have seen a steady rise in the delegitimization campaign against Israel, which all too often overflows to the Jewish community itself living outside of Israel. So for us, yes, Zionism is one ideology and Judaism is a religion. And there is a huge amount of correlation between the two. Understandable. But the ideology of Zionism, Jewish people in a Jewish state, really, yes, it's supported by Jews all around the world because Jews continually feel that when the chips are down, we really only have ourselves to be able to rely on and the state of Israel to rely on. But today we live as Jews in a wonderful, flourishing democracy in Britain, which thanks to the Christian community, we are safe and we are able to voice our opinions. We can't say that about the entire Middle East and the countries in the Middle East. But we as Jews today need to fight for Israel's survival, and we recognize the support of the Christian community to fight alongside us. We've seen the flip side. We've seen, unfortunately, when final solutions by countries, by people, by interests are attached to the Jewish people, and without the support of the Christian community, and certainly without having Israel as a country for us personally, we've seen how that had almost took place 50, 60 years ago. We see today the continuance of Iran calling for a final solution to the Jewish people. We see the rise in anti-Semitism around not just the Middle East or parts of uneducated parts of the world. We see this in Western democracies, the most educated areas, universities around Britain, about Europe. This is worrying. This is worrying because this comes, in our opinion, largely from politicians not standing up for what is right, rather standing up for their own interests, their own political interests, their party's interests. And for us to make an impression, for us to tell politicians, we are the constituents, we would like to tell you what's important to us, not just your own specific political interests or your party's designations. What we want to do is stand together on the lobbying day, as Robin had said, to say, this is what's important. And if we don't stand up for what's right today, then what might happen tomorrow is we will be repeating history.
I mean, I fell into conversation with a senior member of the Jewish community at a meeting in central London, back in November of last year. This is just a for instance. And we only had a few minutes together, but his comment was to me, I've already lost my home twice, because he was part of the Jewish community in Assyria and had to get out of there, moved to Egypt, had to get out of there. And he said to me, my fear is I'm going to lose my home here in the UK a third time. This is a senior leader in the Jewish community. This is his perception of how things are turning in the UK against the Jewish community as it's scattered around the major metropolitan areas in the UK. I mean, you don't make a statement like that off the cuff.
No.
That's a perception that has been gleaned by observing what has happened in this country, certainly over the last 4 or 5 years in particular.
Guys, do you want to remind our viewers when the lobby of Parliament is, so if they are interested in getting involved in this lobby, and I believe that you should get involved, because there's nothing more important than standing for Israel and the Jewish people, plus also you get a chance to meet with your MP and raise these issues, and it's important that Christians get involved in the political process so that we can have a voice while we still can.
Yeah, the lobby will be on the 8th of February, and it will commence in the morning. We will gather together in a particular location in London for a briefing session when those who are going then into the House of Parliament will be given some ideas on what to say to their MPs, how to present that, how, the practicalities of making an appointment with the MP, and then we'll move across to the House of Parliament itself, go into one of the committee rooms, and various MPs will come and address the group. And during all of that time, people will be coming and going, hopefully meeting up with their MP and discussing. They don't have to, there probably will be 3 or 4 topics. They don't have to discuss them all. They can take a choice maybe of 1 or 2 and say to the MP, do you realise such and such? And having said that, there will be others who, because they're not able to make an appointment with their MP, or maybe because they're not even able to attend the lobby itself, will do so back in the constituency office. So it's an opportunity for the 2 communities to make a public statement by coming together, but it doesn't preclude meeting the MP in the local office if that's more convenient for the MP.
Yeah. We've got a clip to go to now that looks at the good work being done by the Zionist Federation to represent Israel and the Jewish community here in Britain.
The Israeli forces went to the most incredible lengths in Gaza to protect human life.
The Zionist Federation is trying to counter the lies and distortions that are currently taking place and to present a more realistic and truer face of Israel.
It is wonderful and unusual to have so many people here all at one time coming to actually lobby MPs to support Israel.
This achievement highlights the benefits of the Zionist Federation's many partnerships outside the Jewish community.
Israel is under attack and we have to confront it, and we need to do that together.
The Zionist Federation, or ZF, was involved in the creation and development of the State of Israel. Today, it's Israel's most prominent voice in the UK and the only organisation offering specialist media training to Jewish and non-Jewish spokespeople.
Let's go now to Keith Fraser. He's a spokesman from the Zionist Federation.
With the Zionist
Paul
Federation.
Charney is spokesman for the Zionist Federation. He's with us now. Good evening, Paul.
One of the ZF's current challenges is to tackle the rising hostility towards Israel at British universities.
Jewish students are facing a torrent of anti-Israel rhetoric across the country. The work of the Zionist Federation has enormous impact upon the work that Jewish students do on campus. The speakers that they provide are able to put a different perspective and change students' attitude towards the State of Israel.
We just have to follow the line that, Israel is bad, occupation is bad, and this is how we want to cover the conflict. Please don't confuse us with the facts.
Through a variety of sixth form and university programmes, the ZF helps young activists reach more than 6,000 students every year and creates unique events such as Science Days with top Israeli scientists.
I believe that if the ZF is able to re-educate people about the historical context of the situation in Israel, people will lend a much greater degree of support to Israel and its case.
The main aim of the organisation is to build a better understanding of Israel in all its diversity. The ZF recently took Israel's triple platinum selling artist Idan Reichel on tour to 4 of the UK's largest universities.
The project is known by introducing to the younger audience the other faces of the Israeli society, and we really appreciate the support of making this tour happen.
The ZF does what it says, it's out there and gets the message across very well.
The work that they're doing on all domains changes the way Israel and the Jewish community is perceived, and I'm proud as an ambassador to have the Zionist Federation.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. There was a look at the great work being done by the Zionist Federation on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people here in Britain. Paul, one of the major issues that I know that you're going to be lobbying MPs on is the issue of Iran, calling for stronger economic sanctions against Iran to prevent them from acquiring nuclear weapons. Why is it vital that our MPs understand that this is probably, and I've said this before on air, probably the greatest foreign policy it's the greatest foreign policy challenge of our day?
Iran acquiring nuclear weapons at the moment, I don't think the argument has been made sufficiently well to the MPs and to our political echelon. The problem is many of the politicians have resolved with the fact that Iran might have a nuclear bomb, and okay, so be it. Well, then what happens? We can't let that happen. We can't allow for that to creep into the decision-making process. The defense of this country and the defense of the Middle East is reliant on preventative measures. Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon means they hold a gun to the Western world. Put Israel aside. Israel might be annihilated from it, but even put that aside, this is a problem for Britain, this is a problem for Europe, this is a problem for the United States. Iran's nuclear weapon, whether they use it directly or indirectly through Hezbollah, through Hamas, through other terrorist sources, is a gun with a bullet loaded to our head. We cannot allow the argument to seep in that it's okay to allow Iran to obtain the nuclear weapons and then we can start dealing with measures then. This is something we need to deal with before it happens. This is something that Israel dealt with in Iraq in 1982. This is something that needs to be dealt with now. Israel has been shouting at the top of its voice. You cannot allow a regime which has fundamentally different religious ideologies to the Western world, which flouts human rights, which sees death as something which is positive for them, to be able to change the world through death, is not something you can sit down with it on the other side of a table to try and convince this might not be a good idea. This is an ideology. You cannot let somebody with that type of ideology hold a finger to the button of the safety of the rest of the world. We saw World War I, we saw World War II. I do not want to see World War III become nuclear, with them being held by terrorists and Islamic fundamentalist ideology.
And Robin, I mean, we face a very grave and serious situation regarding Iran, but many could say that the war's already started. I mean, we've seen the assassination of 4 Iranian nuclear scientists over the past 2 years. We have seen the devastating impact of the Sinex computer virus on Iran's nuclear weapons program. It's pretty much disabled them for about a year or so. Plus also we've had big explosions at the main Iranian Revolutionary Guard's main missile base. Isn't a war already underway, particularly with a huge build-up of American ships now going through the Straits of Hormuz? Are we not heading for military confrontation with Iran anyway?
I mean, in some senses, what you say is, I'm just conscious I don't want to come across as being, as they say, apocalyptic. You're right. I mean, there has been a succession of covert and not so covert operations going on by someone to try and delay what Iran is working towards. And it obviously has had some effect. But I think, yes, I have to say the whole issue of bringing, the Americans bringing their ships into the Persian Gulf and bringing them in and bringing them out again and bringing them back again has ramped up the tension in that particular part of the world. But it is only as a direct result of the initial saber rattling of the Iranian regime. And so you have to go back to first cause. And when we were discussing before the program started, we have in Iran a regime that has definitely apocalyptic ideas. They are firmly entrenched in this particular Islamic theology that sees that their Messiah, the Imam, the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, that the only way to bring him back from wherever he is to create untold chaos in the world, including death and destruction. So that undergirds, despite what we may read of friction within the leadership of Iran between the various camps, that undergirds Iran's outlook on life, every aspect of life. And that is what is driving their current, to us, unbelievably stupid behavior. And so the Americans and the British and the Europeans are reacting to what has already occurred. And yes, it is, we are living, I think it's true to say, I honestly think it's true to say we're living on a knife edge. Because it only will take one idiot on either side, and we have to admit that we have idiots on both sides who would actually are champing at the bit for open conflict. It would only take one of them to make one mistake, and who knows what would unfold in the Persian Gulf. So it is a matter of grave concern, and yet, as Paul says, we cannot let them away with it. We cannot let them continue down this route that they have been walking on for years and years and years, despite all the talk of the diplomatic community and the political community in the West. It has not prevented them from getting to the point where they are. Now, and I know it drives me nuts sometimes that there is a variety of estimations as to how far Iran is away from a nuclear capability. It looks like at the outset the maximum is a year. Other people say less. In some senses, that's not the point. The point is that they are actively working towards it. They are moving their facilities underground in order to protect the facilities. And as our Foreign Secretary said this week, Iran has reached 20% in its processing of uranium. You don't need to be at 20% for domestic electricity production. So, it is obvious to anyone who's got any wit that Iran has got another agenda, and they are pursuing it with all of their might. And they have to be stopped. But I don't know how we do that. I really don't. I mean, other than military intervention, which just does not, the thought of it is awful. And I think we should commend our MPs, and we should commend the members of the European Union for imposing the strict sanctions that they have, despite the caveats that we might have about what they will actually do. They really have gone for it this time in a much deeper level than they have before. But it's still not enough, because Iran is bypassing them. It is finding ways and means through other nations, to get its oil out and get money in, to get its arms out, and it's just continuing the process. And they're really laughing at us. And the thing that saddens me in all of this is that our politicians and the diplomats they will recognize the politics, they will recognize the armaments and all the rest of it, but they will not recognize the driving force, this theology that undergirds the Iranian leadership's perspective. They will not recognize that that's what's actually driving this forward. And it is so frustrating when you're trying to talk to them and get this across. It's just like a blank wall comes down, and they have no concept or an unwillingness to accept it.
And Paul, do our Western leaders really comprehend the danger that Iran poses? Because surely if the Western powers allows Iran to develop nuclear weapons, this will only lead to an increase in proliferation in the Middle East. And let's not forget that the Arab states are probably more scared about Iran developing nuclear weapons than Israel. Certainly the Saudis are very concerned, as we've seen through the WikiLeaks affair, where the Saudi king Abdullah has actually called on America to take military action. The Egyptians expressed concern in the certainly when President Mubarak was alive, those relationships with Iran seem to be closer. But surely then also means that if Iran does have nuclear weapons, then that's a deterrent. Nothing's gonna stop them. They'll continue their support for international terrorism. They will continue to carry out more audacious terrorist attacks without any fear of response.
That's exactly right. I think academically, intellectually, the leaders of the entire Western world understand what it means for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, which will start a nuclear arms race throughout the Middle East. Saudi Arabia will be next, and then you will just continue with the rest of the powerful nations. And the problem with that is you start losing control of where these nuclear weapons are going and coming from. And then you get splinter groups which might get hold of these nuclear weapons. Or even if you have a nuclear war between two Arab nations, that will spark huge, huge effects throughout the world. I think our leaders academically and intellectually understand that, But I think emotionally, right now, we have weak leaders who are not strong enough to make the right decisions. Yes, we are still feeling the effects of the Iraq War and currently the Afghanistan War. And these were wars which, yes, did have the Western world's interests, but it was a lot to do with the local populations of protecting them. This is not about that. This war with Iran that might or might not come about is not about protecting the local population. It's about protecting ourselves now. We're talking on an entirely different level of defense. Iran has missiles which can reach Europe. They don't need for terrorists to board planes and enter into and fly them into large buildings in the Western world. They can sit on their chairs and press a button. The day that they can place a nuclear armament on top of one of those missiles and just press the button to us is the day that we will be powerless to act against any terror organization which has the umbrella of fundamentalist Islam overseeing it and allowing it, carte blanche, to extend its reach throughout the world. This will only spread. It will not be contained. This is a pivotal time in history. It's a time which our children and our children's children and our grandchildren's children will look back and say, what did they do for us? Yes, as you say, we're so concerned with the economy, and well, our children are going to have to be paying back for years and years. But that is minuscule in comparison to the annihilation of communities, entire communities, in one go. What will the history books say in 100 years' time that what we did or what we didn't do? And if it's for each individual person to speak to the MP and say, you are our leader, you need to stand up, you need to be counted for. And now is the time.
Excellent. We've got a clip to go to now that is called Iran, a point of no return.
"30 years ago, Iran was convulsed by revolution. A tyrannical Islamist regime seized power. That same regime has tried to hold the Middle East to ransom by accelerating its quest for weapons of mass destruction. Its nuclear facilities are now distributed across the country and frequently blocked to outside inspection. Many experts now judge that Iran has enriched enough uranium for a nuclear weapon.
I invite the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran to take a seat at the council table.
Iran's nuclear program is a story of concealment, deceit, and defiance.
Iran's nuclear program has been, is, and will remain absolutely peaceful and in no way poses any threat to international peace and security.
Despite such claims, Iran continues to defy the UN Security Council by enriching uranium. In March 2009, after an International Atomic Energy Agency report expressed frustration at Iran's refusal to allow inspections, there was another troubling assessment.
Does Iran have enough to make a bomb?
We think they do, quite frankly.
The Middle East is entering the most dangerous period of its turbulent history. Other states in the region that fear a nuclear Iran, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, might forge ahead with their own nuclear programs. Iran has already aided Syria in its own quest for nuclear weapons. The supply of nuclear technology to the terrorist groups which Iran proudly supports, like Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, is another deadly prospect.
وسيبقى الشعار الذي علمنا إياه في هذا العصر إمامنا الخميني عاليا قويا مرتفعا الموت لأمريكا.
But what is Iran's ultimate goal? The nuclear program is its trump card in a bid to remake the Middle East in its own image, and that means waging war against all who stand in its way. In its hatred of America, regardless of who occupies the White House, in its brutal domestic repression of dissidents, gay men, minorities and others, in its threat to wipe Israel, demonized as the Zionist entity, off the map, Iran provides a terrifying glimpse of the future. But while the Iranian regime banks on fear, it has obvious weak points. When it comes to energy, Iran is highly vulnerable. Despite possessing one of the world's largest oil supplies, lack of refining capacity forces Iran to import much of its fuel from abroad. It's not only the US and Israel who see the profound threat posed by Iran. The countries of Europe and the Middle East, living in the shadow of Iran's nuclear program, see it too. That's why it's time to get tough. An international ban on trade with Iran's energy sector, along with stronger measures to cut off the regime's supply of credit, can still induce Iran's leaders to back down and pull the Middle East back from the point of no return.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. A very, very disturbing report there about the dangers of Iran's nuclear weapons program. Robin, we're just going to move ahead now to one of the other issues I know that you're going to be speaking on at the lobby, which is this growing movement known as the delegitimization of Israel. And we've witnessed here that Britain has often been the centre for this movement. And sadly, we've seen a rise in anti-Israel sentiment, even within the church. We've seen boycotts that have been organised through the church. How do we confront this problem within the church in this country? And does it have its foundations in the false teaching of church replacement theology?
Well, yes, it has. Replacement theology does play a significant part in fueling this delegitimization movement within the church. But it's not the total story, because we just within the Christian community we see allegiances being formed with various political groups that, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years ago we would never have been countenanced. But the striking point of it all is to undermine the reason for Israel's existence as a Jewish state. It's calling into question the whole process that brought Israel and the Jewish people back to the land. And yes, there are theological aspects to that, but there are political and social aspects to that, and in many respects, it just does not make any sense. Calling for boycotts of Israeli products, calling for boycotts of relationships between universities here in the UK and universities in Israel, calling boycotts on books. I mean, that harkens back to Kristallnacht. I don't think it's overblown to make a comparison. This is, it's very, it makes people very uneasy when they look at all of this, and therefore the challenge comes to us, as Christian Friends of Israel and other ministries who have got a similar burden, similar heart, is education. It's trying to get members of the church, I mean in its broadest sense, here in the UK, to see that the sound bites, apartheid state, the wall, which the other side, as they present their case, often use, that's what they are. They're sound bites. They don't look at the complexities of the whole story, but it's what folk pick up on as they watch the media, as they open their newspapers, as they listen to the radio, and therefore, it's the old story. You tell the lies loud enough, long enough, and people start believing them. And sadly, many in the church are believing lies that are portrayed to them by those who ought to know better. So the challenge is to educate about the complexities of the situation, about the rights and wrongs of both sides, and of getting Christians to look back into their Bible. Again, Paul and I were talking about this earlier, because outside of Western Europe and North America, where the church is expanding and growing at a furious rate in Africa south of the Sahara, in South America, in India at the Far East, Christians there read their Bibles and they take God's word, both sections of it, at face value, and therefore they know that the God of the Bible has not finished with Israel and the Jewish people, and they accept that. It's only here in our intellectual West where we try and pull this apart and make it say something that it doesn't say. And the church actually is in poverty, partly because of this. And so, as I say, yeah, we're back to this whole issue of educating people, yes, about the politics, yes, about the intricacies of the relationship or the conflict between these two communities, but also getting people back to look in their Bibles and see what God's Word actually says.
And Paul, what I find remarkable here really is that Israel's been established as a Jewish state since 1948. I don't know how many new nations have emerged on the scene since then, certainly loads more since the fall of the Iron Curtain and the breakup of the Soviet Union. We even had last year the latest nation to join the family of nations, and that's Southern Sudan. And yet there's only one state in the whole entire world that represents only one Jewish state, that's whole legitimacy as a Jewish state is brought into question in the international arena. And it's disgusting. But why is this?
It comes down to politics again. The right reasons to support or to boycott or delegitimize any individual state should be because of the fundamental human rights that it is flogging or it's accepting. We need to ensure standards are not swayed. We need to make sure the standards are maintained between all countries. Human rights, the human right to life, the human right to freedom, the human right to speech. These are fundamental principles in a flourishing democracy in Israel. These are principles which are not held sacred in the rest of the Middle East. Israel has the greatest human rights record in the Middle East by far. Yet it also has the majority of UN human rights resolutions against it, and UN resolutions against it. Israel has some of the greatest universities in the world, the greatest discoveries in science and technology and biology and different farming techniques, with the research and development of its technology at the forefront of the world. Apple, Microsoft, they're all going to Israel for its support to have that research and development there. And yet we find the hypocrisy of Westerners who, as you say, eat up the falsehoods, the lies that the Islamic fundamentalists want them to take on. And the problem with that is that you don't have a single standard. You look at Syria, where thousands of people are being killed, and you look at Israel, where thousands of people are being saved. And yet you'll get university professors not standing up, and you'll get MPs not standing up for what is right. I think we need to see a single standard across the Middle East. And if anybody would go and visit Syria today, or Egypt today, or Israel today, with their own eyes, they would see what the rest of the Middle East is trying to become, a democracy like Israel. What we should be doing, the delegitimization campaign for Israel, is simply a mouthpiece for Israel's enemies. That's all it is, because it is inconsistent. Most people who do try and boycott Israel don't really know the reasons they're doing it. They say human rights problems and issues, yet they don't know what's going on in Israel. They say it's because we don't recognize the Palestinians and we don't want to give them territory, yet we moved out of Gaza. Yet we will recognize the Palestinian state. We will recognize a two-state solution. Palestinians have made it clear they don't recognize Israel as a Jewish state. The Palestinians have made it clear that Hamas is a central part of their politics and central part of who they are, yet they will continue to throw missiles at us daily. The double standards, unfortunately, allow Israel's enemies to decay Israel. And without Israel at the forefront, protecting us, then we have a problem in the Western world.
And Robin, I mean, this is a very, very serious question. When we look at the delegitimization of Israel in this country, in the Western world, we also then, if we look at the Middle East, see how from a year the whole landscape of the Middle East is being transformed. Almost that Israel's being surrounded by a rise of Islamic extremism and fundamentalism. And if we have a look at Egypt, for example, now, with the fall of President Mubarak and the Arab Spring promise to bring reform, democracy and liberty to the Arab people that have been under dictatorship for decades, now it's going to bring a greater sense of tyranny as the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamist parties have won 70% of the parliamentary seats in the elections, and they're trying to wrestle control of the military junta in Egypt, and it's probably only months away from them actually acquiring that power to take full control of Egypt, and they promised to end Israel's peace treaty. Is the situation in the Middle East starting to look very, very dark indeed?
Oh, I think sadly, I think we're beyond that. You know, there was such hope at this time last year of change coming to North Africa and the Middle East. There were siren voices calling out, you know, be careful guys about the bandwagon that you jump on, that it may not end up being as rosy. And you know, I watched TV programs where these guys were debating this back and forward, and those who were ringing the warning bells were put down as being alarmists. Well, I'm afraid it's a case of I told you so. And as you say, we have a situation in Egypt where by the end of this summer, it looks more than likely Islamic fundamentalists will be in control. And effectively, actually, the peace treaty, I read somewhere this week, effectively the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel is already defunct, because those who are already in the majority in the new parliament have made it clear that they call it into question, they want to throw it out to a referendum. You know, it's already gone in all but action. Now, that is scary, because the same spirit, in inverted commas, has infected Libya, the same spirit has infected Tunisia. King Abdullah in Jordan now faces problems from Islamists in his country. The whole thing, it's becoming like, I grew up at a time back home where my mother would use what they used to call the pressure cooker. You know, it's this big pot that you put the lid on and you clamped it down, and then you put a little thing on top of the nozzle, and when it got really steaming inside, it popped. And I think that's the way that we are with the Middle East. It's a pressure cooker, and that bung on the top is ready to blow, and it will only take one unfortunate incident, and the whole thing will just collapse into an absolute mess.
Guys, I think we're down to the last 5 minutes of the programme, and we've got a few issues to cover before, but really want to go back to this issue, because it's when Israel becomes demonised in the Middle East, which Israel is, and sadly it looks like Israel's going to be sorry, can I start that again? I need to edit this bit. Yeah, it looks as if Israel is being strategically encircled by a growing rise of Islamic fundamentalism and extremism in the Middle East. But isn't it a case that when the Jewish people suffer, then others suffer as well? And with this rise of Islamic extremism, we're witnessing a large rise in attacks against the ancient Christian communities of the Middle East, such as Egypt and Iraq and also Syria now.
It's an horrific situation that we are seeing. The Jews and Israel are at the forefront of a geographical and political ideological fight at the moment, and have been for a while. We are now seeing the Jews were thrown out of Tunisia, Libya, North Africa decades ago, thrown out of Iran, thrown out of the houses in Iraq. We saw this. What we're now seeing are Christian minorities going through the same process. If we don't put a stop to it now, then who else will come forward next? Then it's different sects of the ideology. Then we are only left with what the powerful Islamists want to see, and that is a return to fundamentalism. Let's get rid of every dissenting voice. Let's demonize and delegitimize every alternative opinion. Let's take the Western world's opinion and throw it out. Let's silence them. By demonizing, delegitimizing Israel, you are silencing the voices. And now we are here hearing the screams of Christian minorities in these voices crying to us and saying, help us. We've lived here our whole lives, our fathers and our fathers' fathers. Where are my Christian friends to come and help me? Well, I have to tell you, Israel is there ready to fight for these Christian minorities. We would like to help you and support you as much as you have helped and support us. We are here for you as much as you are here for us.
Which really brings us on to a point. I mean, we're coming rapidly to the end of the programme. And this is an opportunity that Christians have of standing with Israel and the Jewish people, and by showing some of the debt that we owe the Jewish people with this lobby of Parliament. So do you want to talk about a little bit more about why this is such a vital opportunity for Christians to get involved at this time, and the dates and the times again?
Well, as I say again, it's the 8th of February, meeting if you contact either the ZF through the website, the details will be up on the screen, or you contact CFI, again, the details will be on the screen. We'll give you the specifics. I'm sorry, just in the world that we live in, it's not a good idea just to broadcast it, all the details in a program like this, but we'll gladly give the specifics. But the prime thing is that it's an opportunity for people to make a public display in Parliament. You get 150, 200 people going into Parliament as one group, it makes an impact. It makes an impact on the staff in the House of Westminster, it makes an impact on the MPs, because they want to know what are all these people doing here. And it's, as I said, it's an opportunity for us to do something practical, to say, listen, you're my MP, this is what I think on this and this. You may disagree with me as my MP, but I voted for you, or I put you where you are. You need to listen to what I have to say and take it on board.
And Paul, how important is it to have that support of the Christian community by having Christians join forces with the Zionist Federation in meeting with their MPs and discussing some of these vital issues we discussed on this programme today?
It's critical. It shows the MPs that this is not necessarily a Jewish issue, but this is a Western liberal issue, an issue from all who hold freedom and democracy dear to their hearts, who hold what is right, morally, liberally, what is right to all of our hearts. It's not purely my sole Jewish interest that I'm worrying about my Jewish brother. This is something that is important for everybody around the world.
Guys, I just want to thank you for being my guest today on the Middle East Report, and I hope the lobby of Parliament goes very, very well. And I want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report, discussing the importance of lobbying our MPs, of making a difference in Parliament. And, you know, this is not only a fight about the survival of Israel and the Jewish people, this is a fight about our entire survival of our Western civilization, our Judean Christian heritage. And if this is not worth fighting for, then I don't know what is. So it's time that we raise our voices, that we make our views known, and that we make a stand before things become too late, or before we enter a stage where we won't be able to make such a stand. We don't have the freedom of speech and the democracy and the freedoms we have now because we haven't fought for them. So let's preserve these, let's stand with Israel and the Jewish people at this time, and let's go and see our MPs in Parliament. So thank you for watching this edition of the Middle East Report.
אור חדש מזהיר בשמי התכלת, רוח ים דוהרת במרחב, אנו אוהבים אותך מולדת, בשלום בשבר ובקרב, מצפון הרים והכנרת, נפיל בדרך אבות, לך נבנה, לך ניבנה מולדת, בתפילה בלב אזוז והוד, אויב או יד בוגדת, גיבור על הגלעד, נאהב אותך מולדת, בקודש ולעד. נקימך פורחת כליל תפארת, כלת מלך אם הנביאים, מים סוף קדמת הגן מולדת, נקדש זמירות ותהילים, אם יקום אויב או יד בוגדת, אם ייפול גיבור על הגלעד, עד עולם נאהב אותך מולדת, לנו את בקודש ולעד, אויב או יד בוגדת, גיבור על הגלעד, נאהב אותך מולדת, בקודש ולעד, נאהב אותך מולדת, בקודש אור חדש מזהיר בשמי התכלת, רוח ים דוהרת במרחב, אנו אוהבים אותך מולדת, בשלום, בשבר ובקרב.